All right, there we go. And let me go ahead and put the project page into the chat. So with this, you'll be able to access the slides for this, as well as the draft final report, or sorry, the final report. So thank you everyone for being here. We're pleased to have Dr. Maggie Delmas here to present today. Dr. Delmas is a professor of management at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and the Anderson School of Management. Her research focuses on sustainability, including how to promote voluntary conservation behavior. She will be presenting today on her work reviewing strategies to promote lower polluting behaviors among consumers. Promoting voluntary behavior is really important, and it's part of reaching our goals on emissions. So thank you, Dr. Delmas, for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. I will co-present that actually with Brent Wilson, who is a postdoctoral researcher and has been working with us on this project. This is a joint project with Professor Craig Foss, Noah Goldstein, Deepak Rajagopal at UCLA. So, yes, as you just said, overconsumption is a major issue today. And increased overconsumption or consumption often counteract the environmental benefits of technological advancement. The 2023 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC report on climate change states that the world need to reduce, of course, greenhouse.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry, someone talking? Okay, so the IPCC reports state that the world needs to, of course, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but that kind of technology won't be enough. Lifestyle changes, along with technological progress, will be necessary to mitigate environmental impact, and changing behavior has a lot of potential. So the IPCC reports this role of cultural factors in demand-side mitigation, including individual choices, behaviors, lifestyle changes, social norm, culture. And so the question is how? And maybe we can move to the next slide. How are we going to do this? And kind of this is what this kind of project was kind of about. What are the interventions that are more effective? How can policymakers use behavioral intervention to reduce, kind of pollution and to facilitate lower polluting consumer choice, which is the title of the report. So the objective of this project was to develop a framework to think about consumption behavior, to think about the barriers to kind of reduction of this consumption, and to assess what type of behavioral interventions could be developed and have been found in the literature to be quite effective, and to design a pilot to test some of the ideas. So here you have the product objective, which is a systematic literature review of existing intervention. And then trying a couple of online experiments, kind of to design a communication campaign for the California Air Resources Board to implement at a later stage. So first, the framework, and maybe that's the next slide. How should we think about consumer behavior? What is the main reason we don't see more sustainable consumption behavior? And our surveys indicate that most people perceive the magnitude of environmental problems, and when you survey them, asking question like, if things continue on their present course, we will soon experience kind of a major catastrophe. If you ask that question to people, and this has been conducted in many surveys, on average, 75% agree with this. Yes, there is a problem. When you look at the percentage of greener product on the market, those with eco labels, for example, are in the single digits. So less than 10% of the products, have eco labels. So what is the problem? And I think that one issue is that green consumers, such as actually those who are purchasing these products, are relatively few on the markets, and the same as brown consumers, those with driving Hummers. So these are kind of minorities in the economy, and most of us are right in the middle, I call them the convenient environmentalist. That means we're convenient because we have a lot of excuses for not buying greening products or not changing our behavior. The products are too expensive, or they are of a lower quality, or I don't know if this product is actually really making an impact, or I don't trust the label. So I think it's we want to do the right thing, but when it's convenient for us. So actually, in these surveys, when you ask people, what are the kind of problems, the barriers, very few actually states, environmental issues are not a priority for me. So that's not the reason. There are other reasons. And so, kind of one question is, what is it going to take to overcome these excuses? And so research tells us that consumers buy green products when they benefit not just the environment, but themselves. So they basically have some private benefits. So we developed the framework to identify what type of personal benefits can be identified that are related to greener consumption. And so we identified 5 different types of benefits that are key to this equation: performance, status, health, money, and emotion. And you have some of them here, but we call them the green bundle, and I published a book on that. So what we find in the research is that greener product that also features some of these private benefit for the consumer do much better in the marketplace. So in other words, products that have private benefit for the consumers, as well as maybe for the environment, or maybe it's just separate. So that's kind of the question. The public good is good for the environment, and the private benefit is good for the consumer. So can we put them together, or what kind of type of intervention are able to promote some of these behaviors? So if we look maybe at the next slide, I think we have more of these, we have quality, social health. And so if just taking an example, but Brent will go into more details in, kind of in the describing the work we've done. But if you think about quality, Tesla is a good example of a kind of high quality product. But Tesla buyers initially didn't buy them because they have, the car has lower environmental footprint, but because they never, almost never mentioned the environmental benefits in their reports, in the surveys. Instead, they state the superior performance of the car, specifically acceleration, aesthetics. So, and Tesla has also become, and that's the next, kind of element here, a status symbol. So that's kind of like the, we can identify some of these elements that would benefit the consumers and potentially be bundled with the, kind of environmental greener products. And so this is kind of the framework we developed that to study consumer behavior, and it serves us as a guide for evaluating and synthesizing published research literature. So that's kind of the next stage. Let's see, in our research, in the literature, what type of interventions have used these private benefits and whether they have actually been effective. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And so Brian is going to describe to us, kind of how we conducted this systematic literature review, how do you do research, and what did we find?
Okay, so we did an extensive systematic literature review to try to figure out what are the types of interventions that are likely to be effective at changing behavior to make it more environmentally friendly, lowering pollution. So the way we went about finding this is, so we began our Web of Science search, but I'll tell you about in a moment. But we were looking for studies. We were looking for studies that were examining how to change consumer purchasing or consumption behavior to be lower polluting and more environmentally friendly. So just some like examples of like, what does it mean to be an intervention? So if you're unfamiliar with this area of research, you might not even know what I mean by an intervention. Most of the interventions that we're looking at in this type of literature tend to be very simple, very low cost kind of things like email messages or sending out a letter in the mail or a flyer or putting up a sign at a store, or it could be some sort of an activity that could be a short thing that's maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Occasionally, you'll have activities that are much more in-depth, that go in for days or weeks, where people have long meetings with other people. But interventions can be very simple and low cost, which is ideal then for trying to change behavior, assuming these actually are effective. So our goal of this project was to figure out which of these types of interventions are likely to be effective at making consumer behavior lower polluting. So this is just kind of telling us how we went about doing our search in Web of Science. So basically what we were doing is, this is probably a little overly technical for people, but I'll just tell you kind of roughly how to understand this kind of thing. So the AB means we're searching the abstract. We also look through the keywords and stuff as well. But basically what this is saying is we are looking for these articles to have something to do with consumer behave, and this little asterisk, the little star means it could be behavior, behaving, it could end anyway. So we're looking for something related to consumer behavior, purchases, purchasing. This little star means the word could be completed in any way, because there are lots of words that all would be describing the same thing. We don't really care if it's purchases or purchasing. They're all going to be on the same topic and consumption. And then also it needed to have something to do with an intervention, because like I was saying, we're specifically looking for interventions for changing behaviors. Also, ideally, it'd be maybe something like a field experiment, a randomized control trial, a nudge, or behaving change, or choice architecture. So basically, our article has to have something from one of these first 3 words. Also, the and means it also has to have something from one of this additional set. And then finally, it had to have something in this third set as well, because the first bits, basically, we're looking at something related to consumer behavior, and we're trying to figure out how do we change that behavior. But now we specifically weren't just concerned about changing any kind of behavior. We wanted to change the behavior to be more environmentally friendly. So this is where our third piece is we're trying to be finding articles that are specifically looking at environmentally friendly behavior, or green, or lower polluting, or energy efficient, or sustainable, or an electric vehicle, or a car, or active mobility, renewable energy, solar, transport, or organic. So basically, this is how we began our initial trying to find the articles. It needs to be on the topic we're interested in, something related to purchasing or consumer behavior. It needs to be related to changing that behavior in some form of a way. So we've got an intervention, some sort of a field study that's trying to maybe look at changing this behavior in the real world. And then finally, it needs to, of course, be on the topic that we care about for CARB, is it's changing either driving behavior or public transportation or something related to sustainable behavior and environmentally friendly behavior. So this is how we would go about finding our articles initially in Web of Science. So we did this search. And after we did this search, so this is just an example of something that would have come up as part of it. So it has all 3 of those pieces. So it has the car piece, it has the purchase piece, and it has the intervention. So like the purchase, that was the first thing we were looking at. The intervention was the second thing, and then it's related to transportation cars, because that's one of the topics that we were especially interested in for helping CARB with their goals. So this is just an example of one of the articles that would have come up when we did this search I just told you about on the previous slide, something that would be related to our topic. So when we did this, we first came up with 232 records were identified through the database searching. So when I did that search I just told you about, we got 232 articles. And then we had to do the reading of those abstracts. I'll tell you a little bit more about the details of that on the next slide, but we went through and carefully read all of these abstracts to figure out, just because it came up in our search list didn't necessarily mean it was going to be something we wanted to include. So we needed to actually read the abstracts and kind of figure out what is this article doing to determine if it in fact is on the topic we are trying to do here, which is something where we are trying to change consumer behavior to be more environmentally friendly, to be lower polluting. So 134 of the articles were excluded after we actually read the abstracts and kind of got a better sense of what's going on with them. And after we removed the 134 from the 232, that left us now with 98 articles where we read the full text of these articles to do further assessments for eligibility, and then to, if assuming they actually covered what we needed to for this project, we then did some extensive coding of the information in these articles. And I'll tell you a lot more about specifically what we coded from these articles in a few slides. But after we read the full text of these articles, a few more of them were excluded. So like if no intervention was assessed, that's not going to be very helpful for figuring out what kind of intervention can we use to change behavior, because this paper did not actually use an intervention. It might have been just kind of talking about the behavior more abstractly, or it didn't actually assess the effectiveness of something. And so then after we did some more exclusions, we ended up with 71 articles that we included in this review. And after we talked to some experts and looked at reference lists for the articles that were in it, we added an additional 7 to really try to capture as many articles as we could that were going to shed as much light on this topic. So yeah, the articles came from certain categories. So the Web of Science categories where we had articles included were environmental sciences, environmental studies, green sustainable science, technology, economics, business management, behavioral science, and psychology. The research areas were in business economics, psychology, behavioral sciences. Yeah, we're specifically looking at articles that are in the areas that are looking at how do you change behavior. And then we also included only articles that had these journal citation indicators of 1 or more. And basically, all this means is this is how frequently a particular journal is cited in the field. And 1 means it's doing right in the middle. It's getting the average number of citations for that field. And so we only included journals that were at least at the average or better in terms of its impact.
Yeah, no, that's great. So,
and then this is a pretty extensive list of all the included journals, and I'm not going to read all of them to you, but they kind of included things like American Journal of Agricultural Economics, Appetite's a pretty big, important journal in terms of changing eating behavior, because that's one of the behaviors we were wanting to consider. How do you make people eat foods that have lower environmental impact or more environmentally friendly? So yeah, there's a number of economics journals, some sort of energy type journals in terms of that, food policy, and a number of business and kind of consumer psychology journals as well that are included in this, as well as proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That's the official journal for the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. Some psychology and marketing, and also a couple of transportation journals, because we are specifically trying to get as much transportation into this as possible, because we know that that's such an important CARB goal, is to be able to reduce pollution by encouraging other forms of mobility, such as walking or biking and using public transportation, and reducing the usage of personal cars. So we're trying to get as much research focusing on reducing vehicle miles traveled as we could in this review. Okay, so this is just kind of telling you again, how did this process work for the initial screening step? So like I showed you how we did the searching of Web of Science. We got the Web of Science search result, came back with these 232 articles. And then basically me, the postdoc, had read the title and the abstract for inclusion, and I kind of came to a consensus, within myself, I personally decided, does this article seem like it should fit in our review? So should we include it or should we exclude it? And then independently, I had 2 research assistants who also on their own read these titles and abstracts, and on their own decided, does this article seem like it should be included or excluded? And so then after we independently did this, we compared our inclusion-exclusion decisions to make sure we've got a high level of inter-rater reliability. So we're actually including the articles we do want to include. And we had a lot of agreement in which articles should be included. So we agreed on 98 articles being selected, and we had 91% agreement between my decision of the reading of the articles and then the consensus that the 2 UCLA students decided on. And so, but then after reading the full text, we did a few additional exclusions, because we learned some more after we actually read the entire article to decide, we the abstract led us to believe that this is an article that should be included in the research, but after reading the full text, we realized some of them didn't in fact cover what we needed. So we excluded a few more of there. We also excluded 14 that were entirely correlational, because our goal here is to try to figure out how do we do something in order to change behavior. And so studies that are entirely correlational, I don't know if you don't have to know too much about correlation, but basically what correlation is I've got two variables and I'm just seeing as this one goes up, this other one goes up, or as this one goes up, the other one goes down. And it might possibly give us a little bit of insights, but it's not exactly clear with correlation which is causing this other thing. And if we're trying to figure out an effective intervention, we of course want this intervention to be causing this change in behavior. We want this intervention to cause people to behave more environmentally friendly, to reduce the amount of pollution they're putting out. And so if it's a correlational study, we can't really make very strong conclusions about what is causing it. So we excluded these additional 14 articles because it's really hard to know exactly effectiveness of an intervention, because you can't make very strong causal conclusions if you only have correlational research. And then we also added in 7 additional articles after we talked to experts in this area and looked at the references list for the articles that we did include. And this left us with a grand total of 71 articles. And so of these articles, we then read the full text and very carefully coded a number of pieces of information from each of these articles. So this is the type of information that we then got from the article. So study randomization. Does that mean we have a random assignment to conditions? Because that's an important piece for being able to determine causation. You need to have random assignment to conditions. Because if you don't have this, it's going to also be very difficult to determine causation. And this in a similar way to it's hard to tell causation if you have correlational research. Yeah. So was it an experimental design? We also examined if it was statistically significant. So yeah, did it achieve the p less than 0.05 result? And if multiple interventions were used in a paper, we included only the significant ones. So yeah, so if a paper had everything was not significant, then this didn't apply. But if a paper reported multiple interventions and only some of those achieved statistical significance, we specifically focused in on the ones that achieve statistical significance, because these are then more likely to be effective and have larger effect sizes than the ones that did not achieve statistical significance. I'm happy to chat more about this specifically later if people have any questions about that. This is one of trying to figure out what are likely to be large effect sizes in the published literature. That's one of my areas of research that I've done a lot looking into. But yeah, by focusing in on the p less than 0.05 ones, these are more likely to, in fact, be larger effect sizes. And our goal is to figure out what are the interventions that are likely to have the largest effects. That's the goal of this project. We looked at the independent variable, which is, the intervention used. So what is being implemented to try to change that behavior. We looked at the dependent variable. So this is the behavior then being changed. It could be the food being eaten or thrown away, the type of transportation used. We looked at the level of analysis. So this is how are the researchers measuring this dependent variable? Is it at the level of the individual? I have a whole bunch of consumers in the store, and I'm able to look at the receipts maybe for every single shopper, or maybe I have only a household measurement. So like if I am a household and I'm using electricity, the researchers could know how much electricity is my entire household using, but it can't necessarily know this is Sally's electricity usage and this is Mark's electricity usage, because it's all going together into the single meter reading. We looked at the behavior change technique used. This is going to relate back to the green bundle framework. So how are the researchers trying to change behavior? Is it something related to social influence, because I'm likely to want to do what other people are doing? Is it some sort of financial variable? We looked at the type of behavior that is being looked at in this paper. So measured means that the person is behaving in a way that can actually be examined by the researcher. So like we have something like a meter reading for how much electricity is being used by the household. We have like an odometer reading that can be independently verified by the researchers. The researchers see this person drove this far, and they can look and see, oh, here's what the odometer reading shows. Versus self-reported would be the participant in the study has to either remember what they did and report it back later, or maybe they have a diary where they write it down, a little blog of what they're doing. But there are likely to be some differences in the accuracy of these dependent variables, depending on exactly how that behavior is being measured, where self-reported is likely to be less accurate than if the researchers themselves can verify that the behavior was occurring as it was happening. We examined how long was the intervention happening. Most of the interventions didn't take very long. They were completed in a day or less, because they're usually things that are fairly simple and straightforward, like a different sign in a store, or we send somebody out an email. We examined the location of the study. So was this done online? So some studies have often used things like websites where you can have a bunch of people who are interested in participating in research studies, and then they sit around, I guess, and do complete a whole bunch of online studies. Or was the study conducted in the real world with actual consumers who are behaving hopefully realistically and how they would normally? And then finally, we examined the effect size. And this one's a little hard to interpret, because we are looking specifically at the published literature, and the published literature in general is very likely to have statistically significant findings. There's a lot of publication bias that goes into the literature, which always kind of makes this effect size a little difficult to interpret, because these effects are likely to be larger than they actually are. But that's a whole complicated, I could tell you an hour specifically on that. But this is one of the variables we did code for the study. So these are the types of dependent variables. So these are the types of consumer actions that we examined. We had a whole bunch of different categories. So we had a number of utility things like electricity, natural gas, and water. So 42% of the articles made up this category. And this is likely because the researchers have much easier access
Yeah,
to,
I can't hear. This is the interesting part.
I don't, so the electricity and the natural gas and water, so researchers are much more likely to have access to utility rate readings than some of these other things. So like food was a fairly common thing with 25% of articles, but this is much harder for researchers to get easy measurements for than something like a utility meter, so like a water or your electricity meter. There was some transportation. We did our best to really try to find as much transportation as we could get, and that was 70% of the articles. And then other was kind of a combination of stuff usually. So kind of often it was just surveys of people that included different behaviors that are kind of put together. And there was a little bit of clothing as well. But there's quite a range of different types of energy efficient, polluting behaviors being examined in these studies. And these were the behavior change techniques that were being examined. And these basically map onto the green bundle framework that Maggie was telling you about earlier. Around a quarter was using kind of social influence or social status. I'll give you some more examples of all these in a couple of slides from now. But yeah, social is people behaving in line with what they are expected to behave by social norms. About a quarter did some sort of financial incentives. But another quarter looked at quality of the product. So if you make the quality seem like it's a higher standard, people are likely to want it. 14% look at health outcomes. So trying to say that you're going to be healthier or everybody else could be healthier by your use of this product. 18% examined environment only, which is a little at odds with the idea of the green bundle framework, because the green bundle framework is saying we shouldn't be focusing exclusively on environmental benefits, and instead are more likely to be able to change behavior if you pair it with these personal benefits like social, financial, quality, health, or the last one, emotion. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this environment only category at the end. And these tended to be a little bit lower quality measurements. They were things like hypothetical decisions or things that we don't have as strong evidence that these actually were effective at changing behavior. So I'll come back to that at the end. So this is kind of an overall summary table of some of our findings. This is also in the final report if you want to look at it more closely. But yeah, our first thing we're going to talk about is social status. And so elements in social status would be things like a descriptive norm, which is like describing the behavior of other people. I'm saying this is how other people are behaving. And it's going to use the idea of social influence. So people are likely to want to behave in line with what they think the social pressure is. The injunctive norm is this is the behavior that is deemed to be acceptable by the people in your community, in your peer group. The injunctive norm is I'm saying this behavior is either approved of or disapproved of. And so if you think that behaving in a way that's more environmentally friendly is approved of in your social peer group, you're likely to then behave more environmentally friendly. But this could be a little independent maybe of the descriptive norm. So maybe people in your community are not behaving as environmentally friendly as they should be, but maybe they still actually approve of this behavior. They think it's a good thing to do, even if they're personally failing to do so well. And things like competition, so competing with other people for how well they're doing to like reduce their carbon footprint, or having a particular goal in mind. And so, yeah, these were majority measured behaviors in this area. So measured behavior is the best type of measurement we could have for this research. It means that the people in the study are behaving in some manner, and the researchers can independently verify how this behavior occurred. So they actually can see what is the meter reading. They can see how much food was consumed or wasted, because they are going in and measuring that food. And so one good example of this would be publicly displaying norm information on posters. And I've got a slide on that specifically. But the key factor for social status is this behavior publicly visible to others? Because the only way you can get social status is by other people seeing how you are behaving. Yeah, so descriptive norms, as I told you on the previous slide, so descriptive norms are what other people are doing, and the injunctive norm is what behavior is considered socially acceptable. And oftentimes these will go hand in hand, where everybody approves of this type of behavior and they are also doing that behavior, but they don't necessarily have to go together. Like I said, you could have everybody thinking this is a really great thing to behave environmentally friendly, even though maybe a lot of people are failing to do so. So this is one study that was examining electricity usage in residence halls at UCLA. And so in this study, they gave people feedback about their own energy usage compared to others. And critically, what really made this study work is they had public posters that indicated whether or not this particular room was above or below average in their energy usage. So there was so every residence hall, every room had their room number on this poster, and they got the little green sticker if they were doing better than average, and they got this red sticker if they were doing worse than average. And so everybody could then see which rooms are doing well or which rooms are not doing so well. And so this is one way of being able to change behavior, because it's making it public which rooms are conserving energy and which rooms are not conserving energy. So therefore, now they can possibly get some social status by behaving more environmentally friendly or not. And in this kind of situation where residence hall users are not responsible for paying their own energy usage, that's just kind of, they pay their monthly fee, their semester fees for living here, but they don't have to pay based on how much usage they are personally using. And so in these kind of situations, it might be especially important to have something like social influence that can change behavior, because in this environment, there's not any kind of a personal financial benefit for cutting back by electricity. Usually, if you use less electricity, you have a lower electricity bill at the end of the month. But the way the electricity is being handled in these residence halls, there's no personal financial benefit to cutting back my electricity. So it might be important to have something like social status to change behavior in those situations. It's probably important to set realistic expectations. So if the target behavior is too far out of reach, people may quickly stop working towards the goal. You need something that's reasonable to do. It's important to consider the person's in-group. So social norms are more effective when they come from individuals or groups that an individual identifies with or respect. So if I'm going to be telling people about the behavior that's going on, you want to make sure that these are people that that person likes, they want to be respected by. Otherwise, it's probably going to be ineffective. If you tell them about the behavior of some group of people that they can't stand, that's probably not going to provide a good level of social influence or changing their behavior. Another thing that's really important to consider is this idea of spillover. So in this study, they were targeting water usage, and they were saying this is how your usage of water compares with other people in the community. They're using that social norm information to try to change water usage, and it did have the intended effect of decreasing water usage by 6%, but then it had this unintended spillover effect of people actually increasing how much electricity they were using in this condition. So this kind of illustrates the importance of keeping track of all of the different variables that are possibly going on when you do an intervention. And specifically, it illustrates the importance of targeting the behaviors that are likely to be the most impactful for the environment. Because if you're targeting a behavior that's not especially impactful on the environment, and then it's possibly having this negative spillover effect, that would be a real concern, because now we've possibly made things worse because we were targeting a behavior that wasn't all that environmentally impactful. And then if it led to something like a negative spillover for an action that is actually more environmentally impactful, that could be a concern. Now we're going to move on to financial. Financial is generally the most straightforward of the behavior change techniques. And it could be things like savings. I could save money by reducing how much I am using, or there could be rebates or discounts or like surcharges, depending on your usage. This similarly, the majority of the studies were measured behavior. So the researchers have actual measurements for how much is being used by the participants. One good example of this would be to provide the long-term savings or costs. So it's good to frame things over a longer time horizon. So I could tell people about the cost over a year instead of the cost over 1 month, because that's going to be a larger value when I'm presenting it as how much you can save over the course of a year, as opposed to it's going to be a much smaller financial savings if it's only over the course of a month. And so like framing like your savings over 100,000 miles as opposed to 100 miles, the financial savings number is going to be a lot bigger if I'm telling you how much you can save over the entire life of your car as opposed to just the 100 miles you're driving. So it's important to make the savings seem substantial to the individuals targeted. So if you're telling them about savings and they realize, oh, this is actually not going to save me almost anything, that's probably not going to be very effective at changing behavior. And so a number of studies kind of looked at this. So like something straightforward, like the price of gasoline and diesel reduces fuel usage, as you might expect. Getting information about energy costs of light bulbs leads to increased willingness to pay for energy efficient light bulbs. So if I learn I can save a bunch of money by these types of light bulbs, I'm more likely to buy them. Yeah, as I said, it's important to provide the time savings over a longer window, the year versus a month, because the dollar amount of those savings is going to be a lot larger if I'm telling you how much you could save over a year, as opposed to how much you can save over only a month. It's interesting. It's good to frame as a loss rather than a gain. So for example, a charge on plastic bags is more effective than a bonus for bringing your own bag. So if I feel like I'm losing money by not bringing my own bag, that's going to change my behavior more than if I'm just get some reward for bringing my own bag. And there's a whole bunch of work on this in the behavioral economics literature. This is related to the idea of prospect theory, which is what Daniel Kahneman got the Nobel Prize in economics for, was specifically looking at this difference between loss versus gain framing, where losses are really much more psychologically impactful than gains. The next part, quality. So this is trying to make the item seem like it's a really higher standard. And so there are a number of pieces of quality. So usability and convenience. If I make something easy to do, people are likely to do it. Things that taste better are going to be preferred. So if it's a food, I really want to make it tasty to people. Things like performance, so electric vehicles often have a lot of better, higher performing elements to them. And so focusing on the things like better acceleration, that's a great way for trying to encourage people to drive electric vehicles. Yeah, and so choices, having more choices, comfort. So yeah, I make it more comfortable to go green. People are likely to want to go with that. So if I'm trying to get people to take a particular type of transportation, I want to make that transportation comfortable for people to use. Oftentimes, more environmentally friendly products are more durable. And so if you talk about the long-lasting element of the environmentally friendly products, that is going to make them more likely to want to buy it. And especially if people are able to use a product for longer because it's more durable, that will reduce the carbon footprint of that product. And similarly, this area of research also was majority measured behavior, where the researchers were able to see how much was actually happening. It didn't rely on self-reporting from the participants. One good example is to make lower polluting options the default. So if I want somebody to choose the lower polluting option, it's good to make that the default option where they could then switch to something else that they wanted. But if they don't make a decision or they don't do anything, they would automatically get the default option. And if that default option is the more environmentally friendly one, the lower polluting one, that is going to then lead to more people going with the lower polluting option. So you want to make it easy to go green. Yeah, so these were some of the elements of quality. Yeah, about half of them are usability and convenience. And then those are the others. Let me speed up a little bit so I can get to the final little bit. So yeah, so a default option. So this is kind of a classic example of a default option. So like if you're installing new software, people are kind of going to want to automatically go with this express install as opposed to like the custom one. So if you just kind of go with what everybody else is doing, you're likely to go with that express option. And so yeah, the default options are the options that are automatically selected unless an alternative is chosen. And this makes it easy to choose this thing. It also kind of often comes with this kind of implicit endorsement that this is what everybody else is doing. And it's kind of endorsed by the manufacturer as well. So we get a little bit of information potentially about that as well with the default option. So some examples of convenience. So default household energy sources, which can vary in environmental friendliness. So if you're going to default household into the lower environmental impact energy sources, that's going to make more households go with that type of energy source. Yeah, and people are often swayed by like the default office lighting. So like if you have either lights on above or the blinds open, that's going to influence if the people are likely to stick with it. Yeah, and the default household electricity savings goal is going to also change how much people are going to want to save. So you want to have a goal that people can think is reasonable and within their grasp, but that goal is also then going to determine whether or not people are working towards a higher goal or a lower goal. So if I'm telling them to save, 10% of electricity this month, versus, I'm telling other people to save 20% of electricity this month, that particular goal that people are defaulted in will then change how much electricity they save. There are also some complications as well. So like in this study, they had the eco driving mode activated by default. So the eco driving mode should increase the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. However, in this study, it was ineffective in reducing the fuel consumption because the drivers countered the measure by pressing harder on the accelerator pedal. So default options won't necessarily always be effective if people are not really wanting to go along with those defaults. And so in this case, it seemed like people didn't really want that eco driving mode in there. And so they were doing everything they could to counteract it. So it's kind of important to take into account what are the consumer preferences so that the consumers are not actively trying to thwart any kind of savings you're trying to get them. Health is another important thing. And so there could either be direct health benefits to people. So like if I eat this item, I can personally experience this health benefit, or it could be things like broad health benefits where if I change my behavior, now everybody in my community can experience lower pollution, lower asthma rates. This type of research was also majority measured behavior, which is great because the researcher is able to see how the behavior is actually changing as opposed to possibly being swayed by the reporting of the participants. And so, yeah, it's really good to have personal health benefits whenever possible. So whenever you can, in fact, describe the personal benefits to people of this action, that's better than instead having to do the broad health benefits where everybody in the community is potentially being healthier from this action, but I can't personally capture all of those. It's like in one study, so email messages emphasizing air pollution and health impacts associated with energy use outperformed information about financial savings at reducing electricity usage. Yeah, so learning about all of the air pollution and these health impacts such as asthma, that is going to change behavior. And in this case, it was even more than the financial benefits. Yeah, so lower polluting food can frequently provide direct health benefits. So vegetarian options are often both healthier for people and are lower polluting than meat options. And so these could also be presented as avoiding negative health impacts. So like if by eating these options that are both healthier for me and lower polluting, I can avoid things like cardiovascular health problems. So this is once again going back to that Nobel Prize winning work of Kahneman and Tversky, where they're framing it as a loss as opposed to a gain. So it's important to provide easy solutions to this problem. So you don't want to tell people about these horrible health problems, but then not give them a way to, in fact, avoid them. So yeah, you don't want to just scare people into all of these things without giving them some sort of an easy solution they can take to actually solve this problem. Otherwise, they're likely to just tune out the message altogether. If you're telling them about a bunch of horrible health impacts, but then you don't give them a solution, they're just likely to ignore it as opposed to changing their behavior. Yeah, so this was the overall summary of that. Emotion wasn't examined too much in any of this research, but the little bit that examined it did also have the majority measured behavior. One idea that comes from this is that exercise can potentially improve mood and sustainable purchasing. So it's kind of examining, like putting people in a good mood, and maybe this is able to then result in people buying more sustainable options. Some other ideas would be like experiences with nature promote emotional affinity towards nature. I mean, it could be like I'm going somewhere, and a lot of these work, it could just be like going to a local farm or community. You don't necessarily need to be traveling great distances across the world to do this, which is going to have a whole different environmental impact. But getting people to kind of have connections with nature and maybe just right in their local community can then kind of encourage people to behave more environmentally friendly. And then some work was saying things like exercise potentially has this effect of increasing my positive emotion, improving my mood. And then in this work, it showed that could then increase sustainable purchases afterwards. Yeah, so this is kind of the overview of the behavior change technique. And I just want to come back to this environment only one that I was talking about in the beginning. So 7 of these studies did not try to pair the environmental impact with personal benefits, which is kind of the idea of the green bundle framework. But what we saw was these studies didn't tend to have as much measured behavior and instead relied much more on either the self-reported behavior or what's probably even more skeptical. You should be especially skeptical about implementing the results as behavioral intentions. And so these are like hypothetical surveys that I give people. I give them somebody a little scenario and say, how are you likely to respond? And people might just kind of want to say, oh, I of course would behave more environmentally friendly because there's no cost to just saying on the survey, oh, I'm going to do the right thing. And so like in one study, they looked at self-reported willingness to reduce air car travel to reduce the carbon emission. So participants are saying, oh, yes, of course, I'm going to reduce how much I drive or fly in order to help save the planet. But there's no like actual cost because we don't know if they're actually going to behave that way. They can just feel good about reporting this behavior on the survey, but that doesn't mean they're going to actually do it. And this is like another one where they're asking people, which of these options would you choose? And they're presenting a bunch of different food options and saying, what is the environmental impact of the meal? So like green means it's a low environmental impact, yellow means it's a medium environmental impact, and red means it's a high impact. But these are all hypothetical decisions. So the participants don't have to actually eat these items that they may not want, so they can feel like they're doing their part to protect the planet. But because it's only hypothetical, it's a little hard to say that, oh, they're actually going to be changing their behavior. Then one of the other environment-only ones, so in this case, they did, in fact, actually look at behavior in a university restaurant. This was in Sweden. In Sweden, they had on the menu, they had the carbon footprint for the different items. And they found that this did change behavior. But it's also certainly possible there could be a lot of social desirability as well, because it is publicly visible which items people are buying because they are in a university restaurant. So even though it is exclusively an environment-only manipulation. We're saying, what is the environmental impact of these foods? It's a little hard to know for sure that it's entirely just due to the environmental framing because of the public nature of the environment of the university cafeteria. So this is our little overview again. Yeah, so the systematic review main findings. The results tend to support the Green Bundle framework that private benefits are important for changing consumer behavior and providing simple information about various benefits such as quality, social status, health, financial benefits, and emotional returns can be one way to make consumer behavior greener and lower polluting. And so there's still some remaining questions about maybe optimal pairing. So some research suggests that some things could pair better than others. So like pairing quality and status, that likely goes well. If I'm buying the fancy electric car that's lower polluting, that could give me higher status. Well, other things might not pair as well, like pairing money and emotion. Those might in fact counter each other. So there's some questions still remain about exactly which of these Green Bundle pieces will pair well together and which ones won't. Okay, so I'm going to turn to our study here where we are trying to examine some other ways of achieving CARB goals. And specifically, this experiment was looking at the goal of increasing attendance at online CARB research seminars like this one right here. So one thing is, so usually around 5,000 people are invited, but less than 100 attend. So it looks like, right now we've got 34 people attending. So it's very much less than the 5,000 who are invited are attending these things. And one issue is, online seminars may not have the sense of urgency because they will be recorded and available to watch later. And one thing you might notice is don't miss wording is a popular business practice. You've probably frequently gotten emails saying, don't miss this thing. And fear of missing out can motivate behavior as well. So in this study, we just had a bunch of participants online that were given this little scenario. So they were asked, imagine that you receive an email for an upcoming online research presentation on a topic that interests you. Each email begins with a slightly different message, and we asked them to please rate each of these messages on how likely you would be to attend the research presentation after reading each message. So so the part after it is how I'm labeling these conditions, but the participants didn't actually see what's in parentheses control. So they were asked to rate things like, this is your chance to see the researchers present their work. This is your chance to interact with the researchers and ask your questions. So this is kind of the human connection element. As I said, this is the label for the conditions, but the participants didn't actually see in parentheses human connection after. They were just asked, this is your chance to interact with the researchers and ask your questions. And they're asked to rate for each of these statements, how likely would they then be to attend this research seminar? So don't miss your chance to see the researchers present their work. This is kind of that classic don't miss out wording that you've probably seen in many emails I'm guessing you've gotten. And then the other one, we kind of paired the human connection element with the don't miss out element. So don't miss your chance to interact with the researchers and ask your questions. And then finally, we were trying to compare this with another study that had been popular in the past, but we didn't think would probably work for CARB goals. We wanted to compare it to this. We have reserved a spot for you to see the researchers present their work because we want to know how would these other wordings possibly compare to this one that has been shown to be fairly effective in previous research. In this initial pass of the study, unfortunately, nothing seemed to be super effective. Everything was at the control level or below. Very, very interestingly, the don't miss out was actually doing the worst of it, which is kind of interesting because the don't miss out wording seems like it's the one that's so widely used in a lot of promotional material. So it's kind of interesting why that one actually seemed to have the lowest likelihood of attending in these hypothetical ratings. So we went back and tried to come up with another possible wording option that was more inspired by the Green Bundle framework, which kind of is about the idea of pairing altruistic and egoistic motivations together. And so in this study, we asked people to rate how likely they would be if they got an email saying, come see the researchers present their work, that's the control, or we need your insights, input, and idea. So this is kind of using this combination of altruistic and egoistic motivations to change behavior. And here we did see in the ratings we got from participants, we did see a significant increase in the likelihood of attending for this experimental design, which is the we need your insights, inputs, and ideas. It's the idea that I'm kind of both kind of using the egoistic, I'm saying, oh, you actually have something to contribute, So I'm kind of saying, oh, you are actually valued. I'm making you feel good by it. And I'm also kind of using the altruistic ideas. Oh, we need this from you. You can contribute to CARB and achieving its goals by doing it. And so this kind of further is in line with the idea of the green bundle framework of the types of things that are likely to be effective. So effective intervention should incorporate information about both private benefits. These are the benefits that the people, the consumers themselves get, and the environmental benefits, because they likely want to help themselves, but they also are likely to want to help others as well and to help the planet. And so providing information about quality, social status, health, financial advantages, and emotional returns can encourage more sustainable and less polluting consumer actions. And so designing communication messages that incorporate this blend can be an effective way to modify consumer behavior. So for example, our suggested message, we need your insights, inputs, and ideas. This exemplifies how these motivations can be effectively employed to increase participation in research seminars. We're trying to find ways of pairing both these private benefits that people kind of feel good about it, they're able to get something out of it, and then the environmental benefits as well. So yeah, it's kind of pairing these altruistic and egoistic motivations. Okay, I think that is the end of our slideshow there.
Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, thank you. So do the researchers have about 15 minutes or so to stay on for questions?
We have a couple of minutes, yes, but not 15. But yes, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
It's like,
yeah, sure. So maybe I misunderstood or missed something, but I guess when you were looking at the various interventions and the effects, I think you said that you dropped or you didn't include studies that showed no significant results for some of the interventions. Am I misunderstanding that?
If a particular study looked at multiple interventions, yes, we focus specifically on the ones that achieve significance. Yes.
Is there a reason you did that? It seems like if that's the case, you're overinflating estimates relative to.
Yes, so we are likely, it's true that the observed effect sizes in these studies are going to be especially inflated. Yes, that's why we're not really putting too much emphasis on the specific effect sizes reported in these papers. But the other thing is, it's true that the p less than 0.05s are actually more likely to be larger effect sizes when replicated. So like I've got a whole paper that kind of examines this if you want me to point it out. Let me see if I can give you a really quick intuition on this, because this is the idea of both regression to the mean and selecting it. So let's say, yeah, this is the example I give in the paper. If I can capture this in like 5 minutes. Let's say we've got a whole bunch of basketball players and they have to get 10 free throws in a row in order to make the team. So that's our p less than 0.05 filter. We only are going to put them in the team if they have 10 free throws in a row. So you can see here, the people who do make the 10 free throws in a row are likely to be better basketball players on average than the ones we started with, because only the ones that are better on average would have in fact made the 10 free throws in a row. But then when we go to test these basketball players again, it's highly likely that they won't now actually achieve the same amazing 10 free throw in a row performances they had before, which is illustrating the regression to the mean component and them getting back to their baseline component. So there's two pieces going into play with a p less than 0.05 filter. There is the trying to figure out the effects that are larger. These are our better basketball players. So we've got our little test, which is going to get the, on average, better basketball players. But then when you test them again later, you're going to have them not being quite as great in performance as they showed before. So yeah, the p less than 0.05 selecting on statistical significance has two pieces happening with it. It's true that it will result in the observed effect size. So if I'm just looking at whatever effect they saw in that paper, it's true that that will be inflated because of the p less than 0.05 filter, but it's also true that using that got us effects that will be larger on average than had we not used it in the first place. So this is going to be hard to resolve in 2 minutes, I am sure, but
yeah, thanks for that explanation. I think I would need to spend some significant time thinking about it and unpacking it.
All right, yeah, if you want to check out, yeah, I have a paper, I have a 20 2020 PNAS paper. Yeah, it's Wilson, Harris, and Wickstead 2020 in PNAS. It's called "Science is Not a Signal Detection Problem." I've got a figure where I kind of show kind of how that works. So if you're starting with a distribution of effect sizes, so you've got a bunch of different effect sizes of different sizes, then you figure out which ones I'm going to publish based on my P less than 0.05. I'm going to then have effect sizes that are larger on average. It's like everybody is, putting there. Okay. But then yeah, when you go to replicate them, they will in fact then be smaller because of that P less than 105 filter. So yeah, there's pros and cons to using that. So I think Martin, I see a hand. I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, by the way, for the presentation. I'm Martin Brown from Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Out of that whole systematic review, I'm just wondering what are a few examples of the most striking results of interventions working that you found, and what non-environmental motivation did they use?
Yeah, so the one we constantly see working is some sort of social norm information about behavior being paired with electricity or water usage. And the reason why we likely have so many studies all showing this is because the utility companies are collecting this data already. They know how much electricity is being used, how much water is being used. So researchers kind of can more easily set up this particular scenario and run it as a study than some of the other things. And so that is the one we definitely have the most evidence for saying definitely works. Whether or not it's a huge effect, it's not a huge effect. I don't know if the others are necessarily going to be huge effects either when you go to replicate them. They may in fact actually be smaller effects, but we have a lot of evidence saying we at least get some sort of a benefit from saying, here is how your electricity usage or your water usage compares with your neighbors. And then seeing how does their behavior change. And we see that pretty reliably at least gives a 2 or 3% reduction in their usage. Yeah, there's tons of studies that fairly reliably show that. So I certainly have a lot of confidence that does have an effect. Whether or not it's a big enough effect to actually solve all of the problems with pollution is almost certainly does not have that kind of a magnitude of an effect. But I think it's pretty reliably does show an effect.
But part of making that part of the situation that makes that result prominent is that that's an easier environment or industry to set up a study because they're already collecting usage data
exactly
all the time. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's one thing we are certainly arguing for. It's really important. We really need a lot more collaboration between different stakeholders in order to be able to run studies on using different social interventions and looking at a lot of different types of behavior that are not quite as easy to measure as the electricity and the usage. So yeah, it would be really great to be able to have more behaviors and more interventions that we could test, but a lot of this probably requires more collaboration between different industries and CARB in order to be able to get that. So
yeah, I want to emphasize that. I think it's really, one of the things that we found, and this was the early discussions we had, earlier, talking about, kind of running an intervention related to waste management, for example. And so what we found out that it was going to be impossible to measure the effectiveness of such an intervention since the collection of waste didn't provide, the data to actually, allow us to conduct a reliable study. So that's a limitation that definitely, and that's where I think the California Air Resources Board, in terms of collecting the data, providing this data, that's going to be really, that is really important. And I think, this new mandated disclosure regulation about climate is going to be really important for people to get more information on what firms are actually, emitting. So I think the California Air Resources Board, I think if there's something that's really going to help a lot to build confidence in the effectiveness of intervention is to actually, kind of provide data on, kind of consumption and pollution.
And I guess, Michelle, I'm assuming this is related to the chat question. So yeah, definitely figuring out which interventions don't work is very, very important. But the way we would figure that out is we need high-powered replication studies to be able to make that conclusion. That's the tricky thing about looking at just the originally published literature and trying to figure out which interventions were likely to be or ineffective, because there's lots of different things that could have led to them being ineffective in the first place. So to really get a good idea of which ones are not effective, what we want is what were the ones that were in the past being presented as being especially effective, and now we basically run that study exactly the same way as before, and now we see, oh, this study that was previously being claimed to be effective is now not as effective. But the literature that we were looking at here, unfortunately, didn't seem like there was a lot of replications, especially registered replications, where they report the study in advance and independent of even before running it and the results being obtained. So I 100% agree. It's really important to figure out which interventions are likely to be ineffective, but that's almost impossible to figure out simply by looking at the originally published literature without instead looking at replications. I don't know if that was what your question was still going to be on, or if you want something else to say about that. But
No, it just seemed like you called out the literature that did not have a significant effect. And so I was just wondering if that removes some information we might find useful. Because I know a lot of times there's already bias. Folks don't like to try to publish stuff that shows, oh, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I actually find that used to be useful to know that folks tried this intervention and it didn't work, rather than only focusing on what does work. Because we might be trying things and we might see a suite of methods in the literature that you've summarized, but we might think of other things, and then we're going to ask the question, well, I wonder if anybody's tried that. And it'd be useful to know, did folks try and it didn't work, or it hasn't been tried yet?
No, that's a very reasonable question to also consider. And I tend to think that I would 100% agree if this was a replication of a previous study, that you would then get a lot of information value from the knowing the which ones did not replicate. I'm less inclined to think that by looking at the ones that didn't reach significance from an original study that was possibly just the researchers were initially thinking, oh, we'll try this thing, and then they didn't happen to get it significant in their study. But yeah, I don't disagree with knowing that, but our task for this was specifically to look for interventions that are likely to be effective. Yeah, if we had been tasked specifically with finding what are the interventions that have been tried and have failed to work, yeah, we would have taken a little bit different of an approach.
I mean, to be fair, there were very few in this, kind of in the literature that, kind of were presented as ineffective. So that's, as you mentioned, Michelle, there's this bias already. And that's kind of the problem of the publication process that's, kind of, rewards those who find something. And so you have, there are all these studies that are not published that you just can't find, that actually were not successful. Why they're not successful? Was the approach wrong? Was the methodology wrong? What was wrong? And that, unfortunately, is difficult to state. It's changing though now. I think kind of the standards are changing with people registering their study before they actually publish it, which I think that is hopeful, but still there's this bias, as you mentioned, so that's an issue.
Yes, that bias makes it especially difficult to figure out by looking at the originally published literature, which I mean just it's a new study that somebody designed and ran, as opposed to the replication literature. Yeah, I think that's something we need a lot more replications of studies to be able to figure that out. And I would definitely very in favor of more replications to kind of figure out what are the interventions that are likely to be ineffective, because that I think is really important information to have. But I think it's especially difficult to get that from just looking at the original published literature, especially because there's already a bunch of publication bias in it originally, it's more likely to be published depending on the significance. So yeah, so trying to interpret things given that environment is sort of the challenging task that we were trying to consider. I think Martin, you saw it.
Yeah, I just want to add another layer to this topic of the publication bias and the need for negative results and so on. I just want to tell you that I have a background in academia, but now I'm working in government, and I often have contact with a lot of local governments, counties, cities, etc. And what I can tell you is that oftentimes these solutions or the projects that are pursued aren't totally logical. They don't necessarily follow the evidence that is out there, because there's, in the environmental field especially, there's an emotional pull towards certain types of projects and solutions, whether or not there's a strong sort of evidence basis for them. So anyway, I kind of just wanted to put our academic back and forth in perspective, because no matter what we find, it may not be applied as perfectly as we want. But I think that the kind of stuff you're talking about today, the way to actually change people's behavior is going to become really important in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, and a lot of the studies don't have the large because most of the studies don't have especially large sample sizes and large power, which does certainly create a problem for focusing in on only the statistically significant ones, but it creates an even bigger problem for only focusing in on the p greater than 0.05 findings, because now we've got multiple variables that are affecting likely why they didn't observe the effect. So yeah, it's true that having low power does lead to a lot of inflation with the p less than 0.05, but now if we have low power and we just failed to find something, we've got a lot more uncertainty associated with that.
So thanks everyone for your comments, and yes, there's definitely more work to do, but we hope that some of these findings will be helpful, and we are happy to talk more offline about our research. Thank you very much.
Oh, can I say one quick thing? Yeah, certainly if the paper only reported not statistically significant findings, we did still report those in the papers. Like if an entire paper was published and they didn't find anything, we certainly put those in and say, oh, this is just a null result. The researchers didn't find anything in this paper. It was specifically only in those few instances when the researchers tried multiple interventions where we focused in on the p less than 0.05 findings. So
thank you.
All right, thank you.